Hey everyone, thanks for stopping in. If this is your first time here, my name is Derek Royden. I'm a freelance writer. I produce an article usually every week for a website called nationofchange.org. It's a great progressive website. You should definitely check it out. You can also access the articles through the blog here. You just link through if you're on the blog. If you're on YouTube, there's a link to the blog there. You can go and check out my stuff if you want to. And of course, please go visit nationofchange.org. They've been doing a great job of presenting different news for 7 years now, so they're just celebrating an anniversary, so yeah, it's a great site. So for today's blog story, I want to talk about actually something that just came out today, Sunday. It might take me a day or so to edit this, but in the Sunday New York Times magazine, the entire magazine this week was dedicated to an article called Losing Earth by, I think it's Nathaniel Rich is the writer. You'll find a link to it below. It's a very long article. It took me almost a whole day to read through it. It has a prologue, an epilogue, and 2 parts. And basically it talks about the decade between 1979 and 1989 and how within this period there was an opportunity to address the problem of what they then called the greenhouse effect, which we now usually refer to as climate change. So, I mean, there's a lot about the article. There were some really interesting things in it. Like there was one thing that I thought was really interesting about a guy named John Tyndall, who was an Irish physicist. He actually found in 1859 that carbon dioxide absorbed heat and that variations in the composition of the atmosphere could create changes in climate. So we have known about this for a very long time. It's just that to a certain degree it's about political will, it's about, of course, industry power. And so rather than spending too much time on Rich's article, you can go ahead and read it yourself, I would rather look at a response from one of my favorite writers, the great Naomi Klein, over on The Intercept. You'll find a link for the story below. And I really liked her take on basically on the failure, in a sense, of Rich's article to actually kind of show the real culprit behind the inaction on this vital, of course, very important issue. So she begins her piece. This Sunday, the entire New York Times magazine will be composed of just one article on a single subject: the failure to confront the global climate crisis in the 1980s, a time when the science was settled and the politics seemed to align. Written by Nathaniel Rich, this work of history is filled with insider revelations about roads not taken that, on several occasions, made me swear out loud. And lest there be any doubt that the implications of these decisions will be etched in geologic time, Rich's words are punctuated with full-page aerial photographs by George Steinmetz that wrenchingly document the rapid unraveling of planetary systems, from the rushing water where Greenland ice used to be to massive algae blooms in China's 3rd largest lake. Yeah, the actual photographs in the New York Times piece are pretty incredible, actually. So she goes on to talk about how, in one way, the fact that this article has even been printed is a great thing, because over the years, mainstream media has just avoided this topic. They say it doesn't give them ratings, it doesn't sell magazines, it doesn't sell, newspapers, but these issues, you don't have to necessarily be a climate scientist to understand them. And Klein, is just fantastic in kind of elucidating these issues. So according to Rich, between the years 1979 and 1989, the basic science of climate change was understood and accepted. The partisan divide over the issue had yet to cleave. The fossil fuel companies hadn't started their misinformation campaign in earnest, and there was a great deal of global political momentum towards a bold and binding international emissions reduction agreement. Writing of the key period at the end of the 1980s, Rich says, the conditions for success could not have been more favorable. And yet we blew it. We, being humans, who apparently are just too short-sighted to safeguard our future. Just in case we missed the point of who and what is to blame for the fact that we are now losing the Earth, Rich's answer is presented in a full-page call-out. All the facts were there, all the facts were known, and nothing stood in our way. Nothing, that is, except ourselves. Klein goes on to say, yeah, It's you and me. We're the ones who are responsible. Not, according to Rich, the fossil fuel companies who sat in on every major policy meeting described in his piece. Exactly. This misreading has been pointed out by many climate scientists and historians since the online version of the piece dropped on Wednesday. Others have remarked on the maddening invocations of human nature and the use of the royal we to describe screamingly homogenous group of US power players. Throughout Rich's accounting, we hear nothing from those political leaders in the global south who were demanding binding action in this key period and after, somehow able to care about future generations despite being human. The voices of women, meanwhile, are almost as rare in Rich's text as sightings of an endangered ivory-billed woodpecker. And when we ladies do appear, it is mainly as long-suffering wives of tragically heroic men. That was one thing about this article that I found really strange reading it, was that it felt, I mean, I understand it's a piece of history, but even just the way it was written felt like it had been written back then rather than written today. I don't know. And I mean, I won't go too into detail on that. I'll leave it up to those viewers who want to go and check it out. But yeah, there were some really strange, just this whole great man theory of history. It's these 4 or 5 scientists who almost single-handedly, completely brought this subject to the public's attention. I don't know, it just seemed a little bit over the top to me. So Klein goes on to talk a little bit more about, that this period of time, especially around 1988, was really important. It was a year that Time magazine made Planet of the Year, the Endangered Earth, its Man of the Year. So this was actually in the public consciousness. People knew about it. She mentions a writer named Thomas Sankton, and Sankton, his opinion on global warming is kind of interesting. He said Sankton didn't blame human nature for planetary mugging. He went deeper, tracing it to the misuse of the Judeo-Christian concept of dominion over nature and the fact that it supplanted the pre-Christian idea that the earth was seen as a mother, a fertile giver of life. Nature, the soil, forest, sea, was endowed with divinity, and mortals were subordinate to it. And you notice this when you look at the religions of ancient cultures. There's a much greater degree of respect for nature than in the monotheistic ones, at least in my opinion, the ones from the Near East, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. So she's saying Rich basically gets the question wrong, like what did happen? And she says, when I looked at the same period from 1979 to 1989, I came to a very different conclusion, that what at first seemed like our best shot at life-saving climate action had in retrospect suffered from an epic case of historical bad timing. So it's funny because Rich makes the point that this was the best time that they could have actually solved all these problems, and Klein completely refutes this, takes the reverse position. Because what becomes clear when you look back at this juncture is that just as governments were getting together to get serious about reining in the fossil fuel sector, the global neoliberal revolution went supernova. And that project of economic and social re-engineering clashed with the imperatives of both climate science and corporate regulation at every turn. So, and she notes that he never mentions this. He never mentions the culpability of the oil companies. There was another article in The Atlantic about this. I'll see if I can find it, and I'll put a link to it as well, that takes a very centrist position and just basically blames Republicans while letting Democratic politicians off the hook, and letting corporations off the hook as well. So it is what it is. It was this convergence of historical trends, the emergence of a global architecture that was supposed to tackle climate change, and the emergence of a much more powerful global architecture to liberate capital from all constraints, that derailed the momentum Rich rightly identifies, because as he notes repeatedly, meeting the challenge of climate change would have required imposing stiff regulations on polluters, while investing in the public sphere to transform how we power our lives, live in cities, and move ourselves around. All of this was possible in the 80s and 90s, and it still is today, Klein writes, but it would have demanded a head-on battle with the project of neoliberalism, which at that very time was waging war on the very idea of the public sphere. There is no such thing as society, Margaret Thatcher told us. Meanwhile, the free trade deals being signed in this period were busily making many sensible climate initiatives like subsidizing and offering preferential treatment to local green industry and refusing many polluting projects like fracking and oil pipelines illegal under international trade law. So, and this is the main point she's making, is that it's really kind of the way we structure our society and the way we structure our politics and the massive freedom we give to large companies that is leading us on this terrible path. And I do believe that we are on this terrible path and that, it needs to change. I'm really happy that the New York Times did such a, long and well-researched and well-written article. I can't deny that Nathaniel Rich has talent, and I hope that there'll be much more of it in the future. So I guess that's it for today, hopefully ending on a somewhat hopeful note. So have a great day, and remember, enjoy your life.